losing a guy like John Madden is like losing a grandfather. It's like losing one of the faces of football from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and even today when you talk about Madden, the video game. But what was really lost this past week in the NFL was a guy that really stood out from all the rest. We talk about his voice, his understanding of the game, the movies that he was in, The Replacements, one of my all-time favorite movies, and Little Giant. Everything that he stood for football and the voice of what football was in the 80s and the 90s. When you look at what John Madden wasn't just a coach, wasn't just the voice of a video game. He really stood out from all the rest. When you compare some of the greatest coaches in NFL history, he had a better winning percentage than one of the greatest coaches of all time from Green Bay. You know what I'm talking about, right, Speedy?
Lombardi.
Vince Lombardi. And then you talk about Bill Belichick. Is John Madden one of the greatest coaches of all time? I would put him in the top 7, top 8 greatest coaches of all time with even a short career. He didn't have the years like Bill Belichick or Vince Lombardi. But what he is to football was, to me, what my grandfather was when it comes to learning sports and understanding the game of football. And when I had the opportunity to listen to him on the radio, John Madden and the other great people that he worked with, the great players that he worked with, and just who he was as a broadcaster, he was one of the greatest voices in all of TV, radio, broadcasting we've ever heard in any sport.
Yes, and when you talk about the modern era post AFL NFL merger of football, he's kind of one of those guys that you would consider kind of like a founding father of it. One of the greatest coaches of all time. Best winning percentage of any coach with 100 or more wins in their career. You're right, he didn't coach as long as some of the other ones, but when he did, he had some of the most dominant seasons as a coach. Then he went to the broadcasting end of it, which he influenced a lot of different broadcasters, play-by-play announcers, and even coaches and players later on to get into broadcasting careers. Now you're seeing pretty much every broadcast booth among the NFL have a former player in it or a former coach in it, a former GM, like a guy like Steve Mariucci. There are different instances that John Madden has touched throughout the game of football, and so many different types of personalities and generations too. From the 70s, he had different types of players when the game was completely different, a running and defense league. In the 80s, he became a broadcaster and started to get more into an offensive league, and there's a lot of parity in it. Then now, obviously, today is a big quarterback league. And between that and the broadcasting and then the video game, the influence he had on those video games, where he wanted something very realistic in comparison to what they had with Tecmo Bowl and NFL Blitz, and Joe Montana had his own game. He wanted something realistic and strategic, like the way he liked to coach and the way people had a passion for football. He wanted to bring that same passion that he has for the game to that game and to the movies he was in. Now a lot of these younger generations of football fans know who John Madden is, not as much as a coach, just for the games and for the movies too, the pop culture end of it. So on so many bases, John Madden was involved in the game of football and just the entertainment value of football, and he will definitely be missed by the entirety of the football community.
When you talk about John Madden, you talk about Pat Summerall, and Pat Summerall was the play-by-play guy, and the color was John Madden, and what Tony Romo is on TV with Nance. If you listen to Al Michael and who he is, and you're going to hear a lot what Al Michael has to say about John Madden this Sunday when he's going to really preach on what John Madden was. Al Michael is what he is today because of John Madden, and he had his first opportunity on television to work with John Madden after Pat Summerall obviously retired from broadcasting. So when you compare and contrast and you talk about the great John Madden and all the different people that he really brought together when it came to football and really influenced the game of football too, guys like Bob Costas and Tony Dungy, who's really developed as a good broadcaster. And then you look at what the NFL Network did with the 2-day documentary on John Madden and all the different players and the people that remember, the Peyton Mannings, the Tom Brady's, the Jerry Rices of the world, the LaDainian Tomlinsons of the world. Some of the greatest players in football history could speak so highly of John Madden. 85 years old. He absolutely will be missed. And anybody that can't sit here and say that they've never played the Madden video game, I don't know what the heck you're playing. It's been the #1 sports game in history. It sold more Madden games than any sports game in history. What he has and what he really influenced, not only to the video games and the sports industry, but really to the fans, the younger fans, fans that probably forever will remember John Madden, not only because of his video game, because of the voice and what he influenced to the game of football. So to the Madden family and to all the fans that understood and maybe didn't understand John Madden, this is a man that will always be remembered, always be influenced through the game of football. So rest in peace to the great John Madden. Before we go to break, I want to get into the NCAA championship games, Alabama and Cincinnati, which if you haven't watched the games or you're replaying the games, I'm not going to tell you what happened in the games, but I expect Alabama to dominate against Cincinnati. And even though I think the Michigan game was going to be closer than people think, I do believe it's going to be Georgia and Alabama in the national championships. But when you look at what Alabama is and what Nick Saban is to the NCAA in college football, you can say that about guys like John Madden. You can say that about Bill Belichick. The dominating understanding of what Alabama football has done these last 13, 14 years of football. It's incredible, Speedy.
Nick Saban had a lot of obstacles when it comes to the injury end of it to overcome this year, especially with the defense, and has done a very good job with that too. Now, their defense has been streakier than what it was supposed to be at the beginning of the season. They have a great front seven, but their secondary really hasn't played great. When it comes to Nick Saban's scheme and his coaching job, and obviously his talent recruitment, which is obviously going to be off the charts every year, he's still continued to bring that kind of success to Alabama. Offensively, we've seen throughout the year what Bryce Young has done and winning the Heisman, and that offensive line being tremendous as well. And even a lot of these newer skilled players that have emerged for Alabama, Jamison Williams being one of them, and a couple of their slot receivers with Slade Bolton and Billingsley and Brian Johnson as a running back too. They've had a lot of new faces come in all at once, and they've still been a dominant force, and they still clutched up when they needed to, coming back the way they did against Auburn in the Iron Bowl, and then beating Georgia, who seemed unbeatable for a while in that SEC championship game. So now they get a test with Cincinnati after that long break, and the long break, you got to imagine, benefit a coach like Nick Saban to be able to game plan for a team like Cincinnati, who's trying to prove a point themselves. They're a group of 5 team that is coming in now. They're going to be in the Big 12 later on when the new conference expansion comes out, but right now they're still an AAC team, so they have something to prove, but they also have a lot of pressure on them too. So you would have to think that kind of thing would benefit a coach like Nick Saban in terms of preparing for their best receivers. They got a lot of good skill players too, so it won't be easy, but Nick Saban definitely has the edge here.
And the only undefeated team out of the 4 teams going into this 14 tournament for the national championship. And you have to give a lot of credit to Ritter, who's been one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. I do believe a first-round draft pick, especially what he's proven to be as a leader for the Cincinnati team, and really what we expect NFL quarterbacks to be, mobile quarterbacks that can throw the ball accurately and do the things in the open field. I think he's more accurate than Lamar Jackson. What he is as a championship player, he has proven to be that type of player. So I've been very intrigued on what this kid has turned into as the season progressed. So for a guy that has really led this Cincinnati team and has pushed this team and stride for this Cincinnati team to be an elite team in the NCAA, you have to give a lot of credit to Ritter. Now, when you talk about the Michigan and Georgia game, I think it's going to be a very close game. Georgia did not play well against the Alabama Crimson Tide in the SEC championship. I want to see Georgia versus Alabama again because I do believe Georgia is the better team. Alabama just got the best of them in that particular day. I think when it comes down to a national championship, it could turn out to be different. Both coaches know each other very, very well. One coach coaching under the great Nick Saban. But I think that the Georgia Bulldogs have a lot to prove in this Michigan game. I love Michigan. I want to see Michigan win. I would love to see a Jim Harbaugh right off to the sunset. Even if he never wins a championship game again, if he can go knock off Georgia and then knock off the great Alabama Crimson Tide, how could you not give Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, who nobody would have thought would be here this year, the opportunity to say that this man has proven to be a good college coach where a lot of people thought he wasn't going to be, Speedy?
Georgia and Michigan are going to prevail on their defenses, especially against the run, because they have some of the best defensive linemen. Michigan with their outside rushers, Georgia with their interior, and the linebackers that they have. They're both on great paces. Georgia's historically good defense, statistically, for college football, and Michigan's defense has been the best we've seen it in a very, very long time. Both these teams are also 2 of the best running tandems in football. James Cook and Zymir White for Georgia have been fantastic, and then Blake Corum, Hassan Haskins for Michigan, both great tandems. So the winner of this game is going to be defined by their passing games. Now, the dilemma has been, will Georgia actually play JT Daniels, who's a much more skilled quarterback quarterback than Stetson Bennett, but
which
also
we won't give you the information of that because if you didn't watch the game yesterday or you were celebrating, and this is the first time I've seen the two championship games on New Year's Eve. It's usually on New Year's Day. I understand why the NCAA tried to do this. They're doing it to try to keep people home to watch the games now so they don't go out and party and get COVID-19.
Yeah, so the quarterback battles I think are going to be interesting because JT Daniels is somebody that can stretch the field more, where Stetson Bennett is kind of your more traditional basic quarterback, kind of like Jake Fromm was on their championship team that lost to Alabama 4 years ago. And then for Michigan, it's that same kind of thing with Cade McNamara. He's not really a special talent type quarterback, but he's been effective. He's been clutch when they've needed him to be. So the winner of this game is going to be the same one that stretches the field, because in order to beat a team like Alabama, who they'll probably have to play next, they're going to have to be able to be multi-dimensional. You can't be a one-dimensional team against a Nick Saban type team. Both these teams have to really prove themselves as that kind of identity, because Georgia looked like they had that in the beginning of the season, and then all of a sudden the last month and a half, it seems like they were just all running in defense. And Michigan, it seems like all their games are won by the same kind of identity too, especially on the road. So in a neutral site type game with a lot of pressure, it'll be interesting to see if they stick to their strengths and try to play strength on strength, and who will be able to expose that passing game to be able to do a little bit more, because whoever wins this game is going to have to be the better coached guy. And both these coaches have had their questionable games and big games in the past.